CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Juliet Mann. Our top stories. European leaders gather to discuss vaccine export controls amid the ongoing row over AstraZeneca.
Our other headlines: the world's biggest traffic jam. The operation continues to move the ship, causing gridlock in the Suez Canal.
Swedish clothing giant H&M faces a consumer backlash in China for saying it won't use cotton from Xinjiang.
And no run-of-the-mill painting, a rare Van Gogh artwork, up for auction, with the price expected to be in the millions. To block or not to block exports of vaccines and vaccine components, that's the question EU leaders have been debating at a virtual summit. The ongoing row with the UK over AstraZeneca vaccine shipments led the European Commission President to give the EU more powers to stop vaccines from being exported. But some countries in the Union are uneasy that this move could lead to more countries missing out on vital supplies. Well, in a moment, we'll talk to our correspondent Andrew Wilson in Oxford. First, let's talk to Stuart Smith in Brussels. Stuart, vaccine supply and rollout, obviously the big talking points at this summit. How are discussions going?
The problem the leaders are trying to address is that 88 million vaccines have been shared amongst EU countries. 77 million, nearly the same number, have been exported. And Ursula von der Leyen, the Commission President, saying that's not right and has led to only 4% of EU citizens being inoculated. So what to do about it? Well, one proposal is to increase the criteria by which vaccines can be exported, to make it harder for vaccines to be exported to countries which manufacture their own doses and also have done well in terms of their inoculation program. Another proposal from Poland is that vaccine manufacturers would no longer be entitled to only produce their own vaccines. In other words, the patent rights would be waived. Other companies could start developing the vaccines of other manufacturers. It would be a big move. It's not supported by many members of the EU. There is another problem, though, within the EU, with that how do they distribute vaccines within the bloc? Austria says it should be getting more vaccines compared to other countries which have been allocated doses based on their very difficult coronavirus situation and the lack of vaccines in their respective countries. But Austria holding up talks, we're hearing, by insisting that it should receive a higher share of that vaccine allocation.
Stuart, the United States is about to wade into this debate. President Biden's going to be joining this discussion, this virtual meeting, a little later.
The United States is one of the countries which could possibly be affected by such an export ban because it does make its own vaccines and it does not export them over to Europe. But as well as the vaccine and COVID-19 situation, Joe Biden expected to talk about China, and especially in the face of counter-sanctions from China earlier in the week, what should US and EU policy be in response? Could we see a situation where the EU moves closer towards the US with a more hawkish approach to international relations with China?
Stuart Smith in Brussels, thank you very much.
Well, let's talk to Andrew Wilson now in Oxford. I mean, Andrew, what does all this mean potentially for the UK?
Well, it's a difficult situation to get a grip on because from the language going around at the moment, you'd get the impression that Europe was swimming in vaccine product and that other countries were taking it from them. And so they want to limit that leakage of vaccines going out. But that's actually not the case. There are delays with all the main manufacturer producers. Moderna, Pfizer, AstraZeneca are all falling behind the promises they made to clients at the beginning of the year. Now, because UK and America got in early with their bids, they started rolling quicker with their vaccination programs. But that's purely a commercial reality. Politics isn't necessarily going to fix that. The UK's got its own problems coming up in April and May with supply. So should Europe start to tighten any moves of vaccine product from Europe to the UK, for example, that may affect the UK to an extent, but it's not clear that it would have that much damage. About 30%, 10 million doses of the Pfizer vaccine actually has come from Europe to the UK so far, and that's about a third of the vaccination programme that's been put into British arms so far.
So that's the vaccine story, but there's also some rumblings going on at home. This vote in Parliament about extending lockdown emergency measures. Tell us more about that.
Well, yeah, the focus of UK energy at the moment is a completely different agenda to that of what's going on in Brussels. Parliament met today to vote again on a 6-month extension to the COVID emergency bill, which allows the government powers to limit people's appearances on the streets, to close down pubs and all the rest of it, but also to facilitate sick pay and furlough schemes and all that. So, by and large, it'll carry support, albeit reluctant, in Parliament. The vote should go ahead in about an hour's time, but that gives another 6 months extension to the government for its emergency rules. And Matt Hancock, the Health Secretary, has been in Parliament today arguing that it all plays into a timetable that they're still optimistically hoping to stick to. Something else that's come out from government deliberations is this story about what they're calling now papers for pubs, the need for a vaccine certificate for people to make use of hospitality, pubs and restaurants and all the rest of it, which will need to be guarded and administered by the people running those pubs, which could lead to complications. And already the Prime Minister's made comments about perhaps people have to have tests if they haven't had a vaccination to go into a pub. Either way, it's been controversial, and that's what the Prime Minister's been fielding questions about today and yesterday.
People who, who for medical reasons can't get a vaccination, pregnant women can't get a vaccination at the moment. You've got to be careful about how you do this, and you might need to. You might only be able to implement a thoroughgoing vaccination passport scheme, even if you wanted such a thing, in the context of when absolutely everybody had been offered a vaccine. So there are complexities, moral complexities, ethical problems that need to be addressed.
Well, that's really an example of the deliberations that have been leaked from what the government's been thinking about at this stage, rather than actual government policy coming out. But it's clear that what Downing Street is now doing is having discussions about how the UK is going to deal with a summertime when everyone's been vaccinated, and how to move forwards with keeping the country COVID safe, if not COVID free. The slowing down of the jabs is another concern. That's nothing, again, to do with the European problem, but there's problems with delivery from AstraZeneca's supply plant in India, which means a slowdown in supply in the next few weeks. The government's urging everyone over 50 to get their appointments in by the end of this week, because next week they're going to have to prioritise people mostly in their 80s now and in the health risk groups to get their second jabs, those that were inoculated first of all in January. So it's going to slow down anyone in the groups beyond the 9 main priority groups to getting their vaccination. It could be a long haul towards the summer.
Andrew Wilson in Oxford, thank you.
India has temporarily suspended all exports of the AstraZeneca vaccine manufactured there, saying it must prioritise domestic needs. The move comes as India steps up its inoculation programme, hoping to curb rising infection numbers. CGTN's Ravinder Bauer reports.
Is a temporary, halt to the export of vaccines, both as a grant and as well as for commercial use. But at the same time, the government has clarified that till the situation stabilizes in the country, this export ban will stay. And the reason, because what we are seeing in the last few days, like if I just say what are the numbers today, we have seen a surge of 53,000 cases, above 53,000 cases since last year. So that's the highest for this year. So number of cases are rising. That's one of the major reasons. Apart from that, a new variant has been tracked, and it is being investigated further as to how virulent it is.
Ravinder Bauer there in New Delhi. In the United States, the AstraZeneca vaccine has revised its efficacy figures to 76% following new data. The drug maker was criticised for not using the most up-to-date information in its previous analysis of how much the drug prevents symptomatic illness. Initial reports claimed the vaccine was 79% effective.
Right, must count as the world's biggest flotation. Attempts to budge a massive container ship blocking the Suez Canal have so far failed. A traffic jam of global proportions has backed up on one of the world's most important trade routes, which has sent ripples through international markets. Around 12% of world trade travels through the Suez Canal each year, and the cost of delays to global trade runs at $10 billion a day. Well, Rose George wrote the book Deep Sea and Foreign Going, Inside Shipping, the invisible industry that brings you 90% of everything. And she joins us now. So a mega ship as long as the Eiffel Tower is now wedged in the Suez Canal. You've travelled this route before. Was this an accident waiting to happen or a freak event?
Definitely a freak event because it hasn't happened before. There have been ships that have grounded or got a little bit stuck, but I think this is the first time that a ship has turned entirely sideways, and that's the problem, is that it's longer than the canal is wide. So definitely a freak event, and of course we don't know yet what caused it. The official reason is that there were strong winds and a sandstorm, and so perhaps the containers stacked high on the deck acted like a sail, pushing the ship off course and then getting it jammed, but who knows?
Well, picture yourself there. And what do you think the move would be like? And what's it like for people who live and work that route?
I mean, working in modern shipping it depends on what kind of ship you're on. It's different if you're on a bulk cargo or a tanker or a container vessel. So I can only speak to what it's like on a container vessel, as that's what I travelled on. And to be honest, it's quite a hard life, even if you may be relatively well paid, depending on where you come from in the world. But it's isolating. You miss family time, you miss births and birthdays of your children. So although people are treating this with a little bit of levity, really, I really do feel for the crews, not just on the Ever Given, but also on the 156 ships that are stuck waiting at either end of the canal, because every single day that they're stuck there is a day that they can't get home. And some of these people, mostly men, will have been on board, will be on long 6 to 9 months contracts, and so it's kind of like being in prison. And in fact, they do joke that being at sea is like being in prison with a salary. But it's like being in prison in that you count down the days, and so they'll be counting down the days and then seeing these days mount up, and they can't just leave early. They've got to get the stuff that they're carrying to where it's going. So I really do feel for them.
Now, it's the industry that you say brings us 90% of everything. As you mentioned, there are blockages now in both directions. Oil's not getting through, LNG's not getting through. What's the potential economic ripple effect?
It's potentially huge. I mean, as you say, it's a really important gateway for oil coming, particularly from the Gulf back to the US and to Europe. And obviously, oil prices already are going up. I don't know what's on the other ships. I don't know, although I do know actually that the ship that is stuck behind the Ever Given, or that was stuck behind it, was actually the ship that I travelled on in 2010. So that would be a mixed container vessel, I would think, so probably carrying all sorts back from Asia to Europe. And I don't know whether that will have a knock-on effect in general consumables. It's a pretty robust industry, but it's an industry in which margins can be very tight. And therefore, the two things that you don't have a lot to spare are time and money.
Well, Rose George, thank you very much. Interesting stuff.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, seeing red. An ailing bank sees German savers joining forces to take mass action.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to the Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London. Who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN.
Don't forget you can sign up to our daily newsletter. We bring you all the top business headlines straight to your inbox. So sign up for free at this address. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Retail clothing giants H&M and Nike are facing a consumer backlash in China after expressing concern about alleged forced labour in Xinjiang province. Many Chinese customers have called for boycotts of the fashion brands. Celebrities have cut ties and e-commerce platforms dropped after the retailers announced they would not source cotton produced in the region. Beijing has called the allegations of forced labour malicious lies.
First, Xinjiang cotton ranks among the best in the world. So if companies choose not to use it, that's their loss. Second, the allegations of forced labour are malicious lies fabricated by anti-China forces to smear China and disrupt safety and security and contain China's development. Third, most would think that to provide more job opportunities, including to ethnic minorities, is a good thing. But others believe there must be forced labour and dark oppression. Why? Because they have done that throughout history, so they presume others are doing the same. Fourth, China is open about its actions. Chinese people are friendly and open, but will not be insulted.
Chinese technology stocks have dropped sharply as fears grow of possible delistings from US exchanges. Hong Kong shares in e-commerce giant Alibaba closed 4% lower. Internet business Tencent fell 2.8%. And search engine Baidu, which debuted this week, tumbled 9.7%. Well, this comes after the US securities regulator adopted measures that could kick foreign companies off American stock exchanges if they don't comply with auditing standards. Let's talk to our correspondent Giles Gibson in Washington. Giles, good to see you. Why is this pressure mounting on Chinese tech firms?
Well, Julia, traders appear to be reacting to the Securities and Exchange Commission here in the United States adopting this new law, which was actually introduced by the previous Trump administration. It's known as the Holding Foreign Companies Accountable Act. And what it means is that companies have to demonstrate, for example, that they don't have any control from a foreign government entity. For Chinese companies in particular, they have to name any board members who are also members of the Chinese Communist Party as well. And if companies are found to be in breach of the regulations in this new act, the Holding Foreign Companies Accountable Act, then they are at risk of being delisted from stock exchanges here in the United States, which would have massive effects for any company who is looking to try and raise capital, raise investment here in the United States going forward.
And Charles, on Capitol Hill, major US tech giants are testifying before Congress. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Facebook, Jack Dorsey, the CEO of Twitter, and Sundar Pichai, who's the CEO of Google, are all testifying to a committee in the House of Representatives. This committee, the hearing has just kicked off in the last 10 or 15 minutes or so. We've heard the Democratic chairman accusing these three CEOs of contributing to an environment here in the United States in which, and I'm quoting him here, he says we're drowning in disinformation. We're also expecting a lot of questions from the members of Congress on that panel about Section 230, which the Biden administration perhaps wants to repeal. Joe Biden said he wanted to repeal it when he was a candidate running for office. This Section 230 is a piece of legislation which means that these social media giants are not liable for the content that is on their platforms. And we have actually had some written testimony from Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Facebook, going into this hearing, saying that he wants those protections to stay in place, but he also wants platforms to be required to have systems to identify unlawful content and then remove it once it's identified.
Giles Gibson, thanks for the update.
A two-day court hearing is underway in the UK to determine whether to allow an historic $19 billion class action against MasterCard to proceed. It's alleged that MasterCard overcharged more than 46 million customers in Britain over 16 years from 1992. The Central Bank of Ireland has slapped Ulster Bank with a record penalty of nearly $45 million for its role in the country's tracker mortgage scandal. Customers were overcharged after the bank deliberately moved them off cheap mortgages during the 2008 financial crash. Incorrect rates were only rectified if customers complained. Cineworld has reported worse than expected figures for the last year. The cinema chain announced annual losses of $3 billion. Cineworld has screen reopening plans in place for its key US and UK markets and says it has enough cash to see it through this year. The UK's biggest building society, Nationwide, has become the latest firm to cement remote working arrangements as a result of the pandemic. Nationwide will allow 13,000 office-based staff to choose where they work. It follows a survey of all employees, with more than half of them wanting to work from home full-time.
Some 26 German towns facing $300 million in losses are joining forces to recover funds from the now insolvent Greensill Bank, which was based in the UK. But many lawyers say they're doubtful the towns will ever see their money again. Ryan Thompson reports from one city where each resident is facing losses of over $1,000.
Monheim am Rhein is a quaint town of 43,000 people on the banks of the Rhine River. It's known for a high quality of life, good schools, and what was once regarded as a well-managed budget funding it all. But the collapse of Greensill Bank has sent shockwaves through the city. More than $45 million was parked in funds at the now insolvent bank, which are unlikely to be recovered.
That was like an exploding bomb for us, because we didn't expect anything like this happen.
After 10 years in office, Mayor Daniel Zimmerman tells us the city's finances have now become his main focus. He's learned the hard way that investments by cities like his are not protected by bankruptcy protection schemes.
We thought that there would be no risk. Now we know better. I'm now asking myself whether it was a good idea to choose this bank for the public money.
The appeal of Greensill Capital is understandable. Investors were promised a return of their full investment plus interest, a rarity at other European banks that now have so-called negative interest rates, which charge fees on money saved for later. But Greensill Capital saw its debt repackaging business fall apart overnight, forcing Germany's financial watchdog to suspend operations, warning that it would soon become unmanageable. At least 50 other municipalities across Germany are believed to have invested a total of at least $600 million with the bank.
It's a repeating error that you look for high interest rates for your deposits, and then it turns out later on that the bank which pays the highest interest rate is the bank which needed the money the most.
But the loss to Monheim is believed to be the worst in Germany, the equivalent of over $1,000 per resident. At the moment, Monheim is investing more than the tax revenue it's actually taking in. Construction projects are all over the city. And in 2021, it's expected to spend over $100 million on infrastructure projects like this. Topping up the difference is short-term investments, which are the same kind that were held with Greensill Bank. In emergency city council meetings, officials have said that the loss hurts, but promise that it's unlikely to affect residents directly because the money was part of a rainy day fund. Most locals say they're understanding.
Ich denke, das Risikomanagement, was betrieben wurde, war gut.
I think the risk management was fine. Every city has to do this with the money when it splits it up. You have to take different risks when you diversify, and you can't just keep it with one bank or one institute.
In the meantime, Mannheim and dozens of other German towns are taking a closer look at what remains in their portfolios. Ryan Thompson, CGTN, Mannheim, Germany.
The Bank of England has unveiled a new design, the £50 note, featuring the World War II codebreaker Alan Turing, the man considered the father of theoretical computer science, led the team that cracked the Nazis' Enigma code, which helped shorten the Second World War. After the war, he was prosecuted for homosexual acts, which earned him a posthumous apology from the British government.
We're flying the rainbow flag today. Turing was a brilliant mathematician, brilliant computer scientist, but of course he was also a gay man. And he was a gay man who was treated appallingly. As you know, he committed suicide, appalling treatment. And I think Turing is a very apt, in a sense, recognition of diversity. So, yeah, there's a lot more to Alan Turing than just a white man.
The historic city of Seville in Spain is famous for guitars, castanets and its bitter oranges. Well, now a pilot project is looking at how Spain's most famous fruit can be harnessed to create green energy. Stray oranges are being collected off the streets and fermented with the methane collected to power a local water purification plant. So, is the green future actually orange? More at europe.cgtn.com.
And quick reminder, CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online at Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, on YouTube and Daily Motion, as well as CGTN.com and the CGTN app.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, US leader Joe Biden prepares to give his first presidential news conference.
Patient after patient after patient. They take a long time to get better. They're the sickest patients we've ever seen.
It's a race against time, because we can all see the threat that our NHS faces, the pressure it's under.
We're dealing with something we knew very little about.
Europe's first two epicentres in February have received their first dose of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine.
Another day, another grim milestone for the UK in its fight against COVID-19. 100,000 people have now lost their lives after contracting the virus.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas. Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we try to save the world.
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and me, Juliet Mann. Our top stories. European leaders gather to discuss vaccine export controls amid the ongoing row over AstraZeneca.
One of the headlines, this is the world's biggest traffic jam. The operation continues to move this ship, causing gridlock in the Suez Canal.
And a rare Van Gogh artwork up for auction has just been sold for $16.5 million.
Swedish clothing giant H&M faces a consumer backlash in China for saying it won't use cotton from Xinjiang.
The DPRK has fired 2 ballistic missiles into the Sea of Japan in the first missile test since Joe Biden became US president. It comes just days after Pyongyang reportedly fired 2 non-ballistic missiles into the Yellow Sea. Jack Barton reports.
The DPRK's launch of 2 ballistic missiles that flew around 450 kilometers prompted South Korea's president to convene an emergency National Security Council meeting. Seoul warned the missiles could impact efforts to revitalize diplomacy before those efforts even get off the ground.
I expressed deep concern over North Korea's launch of what appeared to be short-range ballistic missiles, while our government is making various efforts to pursue complete denuclearization on the Korean peninsula.
South Korea's foreign minister made the comments while meeting with his Russian counterpart, who also expressed dismay.
We placed special emphasis on the importance of efforts to maintain a peaceful and stable situation in Northeast Asia, including the Korean peninsula. This means all related countries need to abandon arms race and escalation of military activities of any form.
Japan's Prime Minister also quickly condemned the early morning missile launches.
It is a threat to our country and to the regional security. It is also a violation of the United Nations Security Council resolution. We will strongly protest and condemn it.
The test, conducted in the East Sea between the Korean peninsula and Japan, marked the first time in just over a year that the DPRK has launched ballistic missiles. Many analysts were expecting Pyongyang's latest move, which follows the firing of cruise missiles on Sunday, and a warning there would be no talks with the US until Washington brought to an end what a DPRK official called hostile policies.
It's kind of a repetition of North Korean strategy. Whenever new administration comes in Washington, they try to make a strong position. It's a kind of a tactical negotiation.
The launches come amid a DPRK denuclearization policy review by the Biden administration. That is expected to include consultations next week with Tokyo and Seoul. Jack Barton, CGTN, Sokcho.
China's defence minister is in Hungary for an official visit. His trip comes just days after the country approved a second Chinese-made coronavirus vaccine without waiting for European regulators to give it the go-ahead. Penelope Lurch reports now from Budapest.
Hungary was the first stop on Chinese Defence Minister Wei Fenghe's European tour and involved 2 days of official talks in Budapest. Following their meeting at the presidential palace on Wednesday, President János Áder said through a Chinese statement that relations between the two countries had become increasingly close in recent years. He also noted China's achievements in fighting the pandemic and its economic recovery post-COVID. Chinese vaccines were also touched upon in the meetings. In the same week, a second Chinese-produced COVID jab, CanSino, was given emergency approval in Hungary. A Chinese statement noted Hungary was deeply grateful for the vaccines, which had helped fight the pandemic. It also noted both parties hope to strengthen their cooperation in various fields, including economy and trade, tourism and military cooperation, and to promote the development of Hungary and China's strategic partnership. The Chinese statement also said how appreciative Beijing had been to Hungarian officials when they expressed opposition to EU sanctions on China. Meeting with his counterpart, the Defence Minister exchanged views on relations between the two countries and their armed forces, as well as the security situation internationally and regionally. Now, Thursday's engagements have concluded. The Chinese delegation will arrive in Belgrade for official talks with the Serbian president. The tour will then conclude next week following visits to Greece and North Macedonia. Penelope Lurch, CGTN, Budapest.
As part of his Middle East tour, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi has met with his Turkish counterpart in Ankara. During the talks, Wang Yi said the relationship between China and Turkey has made great progress, especially during the pandemic. The Turkish foreign minister reiterated his country's commitment to the One China policy. CGTN's Michal Bar-David has more details.
Wang's visit to Turkey is part of a 6-country tour in the Middle East. The Chinese Foreign Ministry has stated the visit shows that China assumes a responsible attitude toward promoting security and stability in the Middle East. Meanwhile, China and Turkey have been cooperating intensely during the COVID-19 pandemic. Turkey first participated in the Sinovac Biotech COVID-19 vaccine trial and was among the first countries to sign a deal to purchase its vaccine, CoronaVac. Turkey rolled out its vaccination program in January and has since administered over 12.3 million doses of the Chinese vaccine. President Erdogan himself was also vaccinated with CoronaVac. He recently stated Ankara may purchase 50 million more doses from Sinovac Biotech. Beijing and Ankara have also been cooperating within the scope of China's Belt and Road Initiative, known as BRI. Erdogan recently expressed his support of the initiative and stated that it was significant to revitalize the historic Silk Road on a win-win basis. The two countries have joined forces on large-scale projects such as the Baku-Tbilisi-Kars Railway and terminal port Kumport as part of the BRI. Leaders will also discuss ways to increase strategic cooperation during the visit here in Ankara. Chinese State Councillor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi will travel to Iran on Friday for his next stop in the region. I'm Michal Bar-David for CGTN in Ankara.
Joe Biden is about to hold his first formal news conference as US president. It comes after weeks of reporters pressing the White House on when Biden would hold the event. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Jim Spellman. Jim, what can we expect?
Well, first off, Jamie, the White House holds press conferences just about every day. We hear from Biden most days, and he had vowed to turn the corner on the sort of 24/7, all POTUS, all the time Donald Trump era. But still, it's become sort of a Washington inside the Beltway parlor game to pressure Joe Biden to have a press conference. So in less than an hour, he will do just that. We expect him to tout his COVID-19 response and to lay out a new goal for vaccines. Originally, his goal was to have 100 million jabs in American arms in the first 100 days of his presidency. Well, they passed that on day 59, so the new goal will be 200 million jabs in the first 100 days in office. We also expect Biden to lay out his next big push, which will be for an infrastructure and jobs bill. You got some good economic news heading into the press conference today. Fourth quarter GDP numbers revised up a bit to 4.3%. That's a good number. And first-time jobless claims down to levels not seen since last March, a year ago, in the beginning of the pandemic. So that's good news that the White House will likely tout as well during the press conference. It will probably be asked about China policy, including the status of those tariffs that are still in place on billions of dollars worth of Chinese imports. But his most difficult questions will likely be about the situation along the U.S. border with Mexico, where we've seen this surge in migrant detentions over the last few months. Jamie?
Jim, we've seen a number of terrible mass shootings over the last few weeks. Joe Biden is pushing for strict gun control measures in the U.S. Is that really likely to happen?
Yeah, he's pushing to revise the background check system, basically to give the government 10 days instead of the current 3 days to complete those checks. Advocates say that would close a loophole. That's passed the House, may possibly make it through the Senate. We'll see. But the big thing he's pushing for is a renewed ban on assault weapons and on those large capacity magazines that allow many of these guns to hold 30 or more bullets at a time. Bans on the weapons and the magazines went into place as part of the 1994 crime bill that Biden helped to write and pass in the U.S. Senate, but they expired in 2004, and since then we've seen mass shootings increase. The current political situation in the United States makes it almost impossible that anything like that will pass through the U.S. Congress anytime soon. So there's growing pressure on Biden to use executive action, but he can't simply ban those kind of weapons himself. There's a limit to what he can do unilaterally. So the reality is it's likely that these weapons will still be readily available in most of the United States, and that means it's incredibly likely that we will have more of these horrific mass shootings. Jamie?
Jim Spellman in the United States. Thank you very much.
Well, a 21-year-old man accused of killing 10 people at a supermarket in the U.S. state of Colorado has appeared in court. Ahmed Aliwi Alisa has been charged with 10 counts of murder and 1 charge of attempted murder over Monday's mass shooting in the city of Boulder. Police have not yet identified a motive for the attack. Protesters have returned to the streets of Myanmar a day after a nationwide strike that saw businesses shut and people stay at home in a silent demonstration against the military takeover. Healthcare staff marched on the streets in Mandalay carrying placards demanding the release of Aung San Suu Kyi, the country's elected leader. At least 286 people have been killed in weeks of protests. Brazil reached a grim milestone Wednesday, topping 300,000 coronavirus deaths. The South American country now stands second to the United States in total deaths due to the pandemic. This week alone, Brazil has seen more than 3,000 deaths in just one day. Health experts blame the spike on several factors, including new variants. After 5 days of relentless rain and devastating flooding, some residents of eastern Australia have been allowed to return home to start cleaning up. Entire towns were cut off and more than 40,000 people forced to move to safety. 2 men were killed when their cars became trapped in floodwater. Around 40% of Australia's population of 25 million was affected. Greece is marking 200 years since the start of the War of Independence against Ottoman Turkish rule and the beginning of modern Greece. Celebrations for the bicentennial have been scaled back due to the pandemic, but a military parade has been taking place in Athens, with attendees including Britain's Prince Charles and the Russian Prime Minister. The Tokyo 2020 Olympic torch relay has finally got underway in Fukushima after a year of delay. Spectators were barred from standing in line, but a small group was allowed to cheer a later section. Large crowds will be banned due to the pandemic. The route will crisscross Japan and involve 10,000 runners before culminating in the lighting of the Olympic cauldron in July.
Now, how does the world make flying safe and secure after COVID? China has announced it'll make it easier for foreign travellers to apply for entry visas if they've received Chinese-made vaccines. But some have raised concerns over Beijing's decision to prioritise its own domestic vaccine. CGTN's Yu Yang reports.
China is making it easier for foreigners to enter the mainland via Hong Kong. Around 23 Chinese embassies around the world have issued new visa policies under the condition that applicants have received one of the country's vaccines.
Final purpose of any kind of control measures of COVID-19 is to get back to normal. In this context, if we want to get back to normal, to ensure people's, not only Chinese but also foreign people, to get normal international travel, there must be some kinds of policies as this.
But the move has also raised concerns as China prioritizes its domestic jabs over those approved by the World Health Organization.
Well, so if a country is going to require documentation of COVID-19 vaccination as a requirement prior to entry, it would make sense from an infectious disease perspective to make sure that the vaccine has been proven to be safe and effective. And this is usually through phase 3 trial published data.
Countries around the world are weighing up measures to ease broad travel restrictions by rolling out so-called vaccine passports. These could open up international travel to people who have been vaccinated. But experts believe that for some regions, rushing the policy through could be a mistake.
In terms of timing, okay, in Europe, in EU, many countries are either still in lockdown or they're going into lockdown. And we're almost at April. It does seem a little bit unrealistic in terms of the timeline, given the way that the curves are going up right now.
Experts say vaccine passports could also put stresses on global supplies, which are already unequal, with many poorer countries unable to access jabs at all.
We already have the problem of equitable distribution of vaccines. If we add on a layer of making travel only possible for people who have a passport, that may not even be based on sound science, then it does raise concerns.
Besides the problem of distribution, health authorities say the new variants could also threaten the vaccine passport policies, as mutations could reduce the efficacy of the jabs currently on the market. Yu Yang, CGTN, Beijing.
The UK's top financial regulator, the FCA, is reviewing how to boost diversity at the top of the industry, with many firms setting diversity targets. Pavita Cooper is the founder of More Difference, a recruitment firm that promotes diversity. She says progress has been made, but there's still much work to be done.
When you talk about progress, I think we have to give some credit to the huge progress that's been made, particularly around gender. So for the first time ever across all FTSE 350 boards, there are no all-male boards, and so that's massive, huge achievement. We're at 33%, but that's taken us 11 years to get to that point. I think the picture below boards isn't as great. So when you look at the executive committee levels, the leadership level, the pipeline going up towards boards, the picture isn't as good. It's at about 28% across the FTSE. And on race, unfortunately, we're much further behind. There are still 21 boards across the FTSE 100 that have 21% of boards, that have no ethnic minority representation. There are only 5 ethnic minority CEOs across the FTSE 100. And really sadly, for the first time in 6 years, there are no black leaders in the top 3 positions in any FTSE 100 organisation. And I think when you look at that, that shows a bigger gap and a bigger problem, because the goal for that was set some time ago to be achieved by a Parker review in 2021, and we're a long way off that.
The UK regulators considering diversity quotas, but there's a huge difference, isn't there, between benchmark and a quota, which risks becoming a box-ticking exercise that doesn't necessarily get the right person for the job.
Yes, at best, people could just look at it and say, well, I'm just ticking a box, so what? But I think if you think about the impact on the individual, who is that minority individual leader, nobody wants to be appointed into a role where they fear it's been on the back of tokenism. And I think that's the worst case we could find ourselves, because I think people will be left guessing, thinking, why did that individual get that job? Everybody wants to get their own merit, so we have to work really hard to make sure we don't end up in that position.
But quotas are working in places like Norway and other European countries. Might it be a way to sort of give a push to those companies who are stuck and not making progress?
I think so. I think we also know there's anecdotal evidence that say that the quotas necessarily didn't land well in all instances. There were some unintended consequences around the sorts of people that were getting appointed. I think the bigger thing here is peer pressure. When the media splash a picture of an all-white male board and a FTSE 100 board, which is what they were doing in the last 10 years, to say, why has this organisation got no women, no people of colour? That peer pressure that chairs applied to each other, for example, over the last decade, I think has been much more powerful.
What about the pandemic? What impact has that had? Has that slowed down progress, or do you think it's maybe accelerated a shift in the workplace thinking and framework?
So I think it's been a really mixed picture. So obviously we have seen that in terms of people who have been most impacted, it has affected minority groups. So women most at risk of losing their job, reducing down to part-time to cope with taking the bulk of responsibility around homeschooling, worse outcomes when eventually we get back to reporting pay gap in 6 months. And then we've seen in the healthcare system, people of colour being most affected by health outcomes. But the good things have been around really tragic instances like the murder of George Floyd, a really open debate for the first time, I think, in a generation around the issue of race, and in organisations, senior leaders and colleagues for the first time ever having a really honest and open discussion about what it means to be someone from an ethnic minority in the UK in 2021.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, what happened when this Van Gogh painting went under the hammer at Sotheby's in Paris? We'll put you in the picture next.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Murray, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. One of the few works by artist Vincent van Gogh in private hands has been up for auction in Paris. The 1887 painting of the Montmartre area of the capital was on the market for the first time after belonging to the same French family for over a century. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Ross Cullen, who's in Paris. Ross, we're getting mixed reports that it's sold, that it's gone back into the auction room. What's happening?
Well, Juliet, earlier this afternoon it was sold and we saw that auction completed. It went for 14 million euros. But then since that sale, it's been annulled. And right now, you can see Sotheby's behind me in that building. The Van Gogh is up for auction again after originally being sold about 45 minutes ago. So what happened was that a bid, we saw this main battle between two telephone bidders, one in London, one in Hong Kong. The bid was accepted by a telephone bidder. The hammer was falling, and as it was falling, about to hit the point, an internet bid came in at the last moment, perhaps only a quarter or half a second to go. And the confusion was, did that bid arrive in time for it to be classed as a fair bid? The bidding continued, and this internet bidder did eventually settle on 14 million euros, $16.5 million for this piece of art, and we thought that was it. That was the end of the sale. But the confusion was enough that Sotheby's have said that we are going to annul that sale, and after the end of the auction, because there were other lots, other paintings up for sale this afternoon, we're going to do it all over again. So right now it started at 4 million euros, the bidding this time around for the second sale of the same piece in the same afternoon. It's going on right now in the building behind me at Sotheby's here in Paris.
It's exciting stuff. Do you know much about the story behind this painting?
It was painted in 1887, as you said, 2 years that Vincent van Gogh spent here in Paris living with his brother, and he went up to the area in the north of Paris, Montmartre area. It's famous for having windmills. In the past, the French for windmill is Moulin, and perhaps Moulin Rouge is the most famous of those windmills, and one of those mills does appear in this painting, and he tried to portray more of a pastoral scene in some of these areas in Paris when he came to paint in the French capital rather than urban city centre streets. And he did paint this picture, and it ended up in a French family, as you say, around 1920, and kept in that private collection for more than a decade, never been on public display. And we do await the end of this second sale to see if this bidder will then take it back into another private collection, or if they will loan it to a museum so the public can go and finally see one of these famous works by Van Gogh.
But as you say, it could disappear into the ether for another 100 years or so. You talked about this being his Paris period, his Montmartre period, just a couple of years. Where would you say this ranks amongst his works?
Well, art historians have always known that this work existed. It always appeared in Van Gogh catalogues. But when it's ranked among the top works, it never featured in his most famous masterpieces, Sunflowers, A Starry Night, for example, Irises. Some of the other works that he produced were always better well known, always appearing in public museums that people are more familiar with. So it does remain to be seen if this picture will make it back into the public display. Maybe it will become better known. Maybe the whole story around where it was painted, the story around the auction happening right now, and the confusion might add more of an allure to it. Van Gogh is this painter who does have this mystique. He certainly became more famous for these works drugs that he produced during his life. He became more famous posthumously after he died following a self-inflicted gunshot wound here in France. And it does seem that this period when he was in Paris was very important to him. He did produce other scenes in Paris as well, and it is crucial that this that's been in a French family for more than a century is now being sold in this Paris auction house, and we will be checking back in to see how much it sells for this afternoon when it's been sold for the second time, as I say.
Well, with that, I'll let you go and check on your bid. Ross Cullen in Paris.
How very exciting. Now, it's said that the art market experiences a crisis every 10 years, but there has never been a year like this with the pandemic. Economic turmoil, no flying to art auctions, online viewing and sales. I've been talking to Dirk Boll, the president of Christie's Europe.
It has differed in two ways. First of all, it was a structural crisis, so it has pushed through the digitization of the market structures, and this is a change we hadn't seen in the past. Secondly, whilst past crises were more economically pressing, this crisis has left the money in the hands of private clients, so people are still buying art. People have been interested in art throughout, but in previous crises, people would hold back spending, and this is not what's happening now. We are breaking records kind of almost weekly.
Well, let me ask you then, what sort of year has Christie's had?
Well, Christie's has been a complicated year of learning last year, but given the circumstances, we have been extremely successful. We have restructured our business model. About half of what we are now offering is offered online, is reaching out to a much wider audience. We have gained a huge number of new clients, younger clients, and we have done exceptional sales.
I just want to know what kind of impact that online change has had in the business. If you're a buyer, you want to look up close into the eyes of a portrait, don't you? You want to see a landscape painting. You want to see a work of art. It's hard doing it like this, isn't it?
Yes, in principle, you are absolutely right. But we shouldn't forget that many of the collectors don't live in places where auctions happen or where fairs are conducted. So when you live in London or in Paris or New York or Hong Kong, it's easy to feel that way. But when you live 6 hours in a plane apart from one of these places, you might actually get used to look at art online. The developments of last year have further increased the possibility to do that because we have amended our offers. There is much more to be seen now. You can have an 800% zoom function. You can have a 300-degree camera that drives around a sculpture. There is a lot of content behind these auction catalogs, like interviews with artists and gallery shows. It's a very rich offer you can rely on.
And after the pandemic, do you think this virtual viewing revolution in the art market is here to stay, or will we go back to the way we were?
It will absolutely be staying. That is my prognosis. The pendulum will swing back a bit because we all love physical interaction. We all love meeting people. We all love to look at real art in the flesh, as we say. But then it's also very convenient to buy online only, and we do it in all other fields of life. So I would expect the pendulum goes back. The threshold between online only and live auction will go back a bit, but certainly not to the level we saw down to 2019.
Aberdeen University has bowed to increasing pressure and promised to return an important African cultural artefact. The Scottish institution said the Benin bronze, purchased in 1957, had been blatantly looted from Nigeria. The figure depicts an Oba, or ruler, from the Kingdom of Benin. British soldiers seized thousands of metal castings and sculptures from the kingdom in the late 19th century.
The headlines again. European leaders are gathering to discuss possible vaccine exports controlled amid the ongoing row over AstraZeneca.
Well, that's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
More on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're available to watch on smart TV apps such as Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. We're on YouTube, Dailymotion and, of course, CGTN.com and the CGTN app.
We'll see you again tomorrow. Same time, same place. From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.